At 02:18 hours local time, a 52-vehicle Russian military convoy was already committed to a crossing. It could no longer abandon. A pontoon bridge spanning the Chonhar Channel, the last usable link on the M18 supply corridor between Melitopol and Dzhankoi in northern Crimea. It carried fuel, ammunition, repair equipment, and reinforcements toward Russia's logistics hub at Dzhankoi. The bridge was 460 meters long, assembled from 34 floating sections, and wide enough for only one lane of traffic. At 10 kilometers per hour, each truck needed almost 3 minutes to reach the opposite bank. Once its wheels touched the pontoons, it could neither turn around nor pass the vehicle ahead. That limitation had become critical. The convoy included 15 tankers carrying roughly 270,000 liters of fuel, along with ammunition trucks, engineering vehicles, and more than $35 million in military cargo. 18 Ukrainian attack drones had entered the final approach corridor north of the Sivash. The leading aircraft were 6 kilometers from Chonhar and moving at 145 kilometers per hour. They were less than 3 minutes away, but none had begun its final descent. Ukraine was waiting for the convoy to place its heaviest vehicles over the center of the bridge. By 02:19, 21 vehicles had reached the Crimean bank. 18 remained over open water, while the final 13 had already entered the approach road. 6 fully loaded tankers were now concentrated near the midpoint. The Ukrainian operators marked the target condition as met. What the convoy commander could not see was that the 18 drones approaching Chonhar represented only part of the force already airborne. More importantly, not one of them was tracking a truck. 47 minutes earlier, at 01:31 hours local time, 25 Ukrainian FP-1 one-way attack drones lifted off from 2 concealed launch areas and turned south toward the Chonhar-Dzhankoi corridor. Their routes had been built from several days of surveillance around the floating crossing. Reconnaissance teams recorded when the bridge was assembled, how long convoys remained exposed, where the tugboats held position, and when the current placed the greatest sideways pressure on the roadway. The crossing was not fixed to concrete supports. Its 34 floating sections depended on 2 primary upstream anchor assemblies, locking joints, and tugboats, to remain aligned against water moving at nearly 1.9 meters per second. At 01:43, the formation changed. 18 FP-1s continued toward Chonhar. 7 turned north and left the direct attack corridor, but they remained airborne. The endurance that allowed an FP-1 to reach distant targets also gave this smaller group enough time to wait outside the area Russia was expected to defend. The 18 advancing aircraft then divided again. 8 increased altitude, making their radar returns easier to detect, while 10 descended toward the water. Ukraine was not attempting to hide the entire force. It was controlling which part Russia would see first. That timing was based on radar activity recorded during the previous week. But 3 nights before the operation, Russia had moved an additional low-altitude surveillance radar closer to Chonhar. Ukraine had not detected the change. The higher group was expected to appear only after the 6 fuel tankers had reached the center of the bridge. Instead, the first radar track appeared 70 seconds early. That was enough time to classify the threat, alert the short-range defenses, and ready the launchers before the convoy reached its planned position. For the first time that night, the timing no longer belonged to Ukraine. Shortly before 02:18, the Russian low-altitude radar separated 8 returns from the clutter north of Chonhar. They appeared 70 seconds earlier than Ukraine expected. At 145 kilometers per hour, that represented almost 2.8 kilometers of flight. Russia had gained nearly 3 additional kilometers to classify the targets and prepare its weapons. The defensive network began activating. Track data passed to a Tor M2 on the Crimean bank, and its launcher turned north with 16 missiles ready. The R-330Z jammer began flooding the navigation bands with interference, while gun crews aimed toward the final approach. Russia was no longer looking at unidentified noise. It had a firing solution taking shape. The alert reached the convoy commander when 12 vehicles were already on the pontoons. Halting would keep the rest ashore, but leave the loaded trucks motionless above the water. Continuing would place more cargo on the bridge, yet it offered the only chance to clear the crossing before the UAVs arrived. He ordered the convoy forward. Vehicle spacing fell from 30 meters to 15, while speed increased from 10 to 12 kilometers per hour. The crossing window became shorter, but the column compressed. Fuel and ammunition vehicles began reaching the center earlier than planned. The Ukrainian operators saw the change immediately. Russia's extra warning had strengthened the defenses, but the convoy commander's response was pushing 6 tankers toward the exact section Ukraine wanted, almost 90 seconds early. The same order had benefited both sides. The mission commander considered aborting, but all 25 UAVs were already committed. The convoy had entered the only usable crossing, and another concentration of fuel and ammunition might not appear for days. The attack continued. Shortly after 02:19, the first 8 FP-1s entered the engagement zone. The first missile left the Tor while they were still approximately 4 kilometers from the bridge. Russia was no longer scrambling to respond. It was waiting. The first Tor missile accelerated away from the Crimean bank and destroyed the lead FP-1. A second interceptor removed the next target, while the remaining 6 continued toward Chonhar, on stable, direct headings. The Russian crew could not wait for each interception to be confirmed before shifting to another track. 8 follow-up missiles were launched across the 6 remaining targets, with several receiving a second interceptor before the result of the first engagement was clear. 4 more FP-1s were destroyed. 2 survived long enough to reach the inner defensive zone. In less than a minute, 6 drones had been brought down, but 10 of the Tor's 16 ready missiles had already left the launcher. The 7th FP-1 crossed into the range of the Russian gun positions. Automatic cannon fire cut through the aircraft before it reached the shoreline. The final drone entered the R-330Z interference zone alone. The jammer corrupted its satellite guidance until the FP-1 lost a usable navigation solution, drifted away from the crossing, and struck the muddy northern bank. All 8 tracks disappeared. The Air Defense Commander reported that the attack had been defeated and ordered the convoy forward. But gunfire and falling debris near the crossing forced the leading vehicles to slow at the Crimean ramp. With spacing already reduced to 15 meters, 6 tankers remained compressed near the center, while 5 ammunition trucks and a heavy engineering vehicle bunched behind them. For Russia, the decision appeared correct. Every visible attacker had been eliminated. But more than 60% of the Tor's ready missiles had been consumed in under 1 minute. During that same minute, the 10 FP-1s flying close to the water had covered almost 2 additional kilometers. They were now approximately 4 kilometers from Chonhar, below the altitude where the Russian radar was still searching. Not one of the 8 destroyed FP-1s had been assigned to strike the bridge structure. On the Russian screens, the attack was over. In reality, it had only changed shape. 6 missiles remained. 10 FP-1s were 4 kilometers away. While the Russian Air Defense Commander was reporting the first attack defeated, the 10 FP-1s flying close to the Sivash rose just high enough to separate from the water on Russian radar. They were less than 4 kilometers from Chonhar. At 145 kilometers per hour, the defenders had roughly 100 seconds before the drones reached the crossing. The Tor fired its 6 remaining missiles. 4 FP-1s were destroyed. 1 interceptor lost its target among reflections from the water, while another passed behind a drone during a low-altitude correction. Russian gun crews then engaged the surviving formation and brought down 2 more aircraft. 4 FP-1s remained. The R-330Z jammer corrupted 1 drone's satellite guidance until it lost a usable navigation solution and drifted completely out of the attack. 3 continued toward the bridge. They could still hold a general direction through inertial guidance, but the interference had reduced the precision available during the final approach. The first FP-1 crossed the shoreline and struck one of the 2 primary upstream anchor assemblies. The explosion damaged no vehicle, but it tore steel fittings away from the bank and released one side of the crossing. That anchor had been helping hold 34 connected pontoons and more than 400 tons of traffic against water moving at nearly 1.9 meters per second. The center of the bridge shifted almost 3 meters before the remaining anchor and support tug absorbed the load. The second FP-1 targeted the remaining primary anchor assembly. Its inertial system held the general course, but accumulated lateral error brought the anchor into the camera frame too late for a full correction. The drone struck the water approximately 20 meters short. The second anchor remained intact. A Russian tug increased power and pulled against the current. Its towline tightened, the sideways movement slowed, and the floating sections began returning to line. On the Russian radar, no additional tracks remained between the northern shoreline and the bridge. But below the radar's clutter line, one FP-1 was still approaching. Its assigned target was a locking joint near the center, but the operator saw the tug holding the entire structure in position. The tug lay only a few degrees from the drone's original approach line. The camera feed offered only 4 seconds of usable imagery. At 145 kilometers per hour, that represented more than 160 meters of closing distance. Ukraine had 4 seconds to abandon the original aim point, shift onto the tug, and hold the new line through a deteriorating video feed. The FP-1 shifted several degrees off its original approach line. The explosion appeared beside the bridge, and for the first 6 seconds, the roadway remained straight. On the 7th second, the tug's engines lost power. The FP-1 had struck near the propulsion controls, damaging the machinery that kept the vessel pulling against the current. The tug did not sink, but it lost thrust and began drifting sideways. Only one upstream anchor was now holding the crossing in line. It was no longer stabilizing a single section. It was resisting the current acting across all 460 meters of the bridge, including 34 connected pontoons and more than 400 tons of vehicles concentrated above them. The crossing did not need to collapse to become unusable. It only needed to move farther than its locking joints, and landing ramps could follow. The center section shifted 3 meters, then 5. Drivers felt the roadway tilting beneath their wheels and applied their brakes almost simultaneously. With their wheels locked on the sloping steel surface, the heaviest vehicles began sliding sideways. A large engineering vehicle struck the bridge railing and pulled unevenly against the nearest locking joint. At the Crimean end, the exit ramp moved away from its landing point, leaving the leading trucks with no continuous road onto the bank. The bridge was not exploding. It was slowly rotating around the one anchor that remained. Vehicles at the front stopped when the ramp separated. The spacing compressed earlier from 30 meters to 15 now left no room for the column to absorb the stop. Trucks farther back continued moving for several seconds before the warning reached them. A fuel tanker collided with the engineering vehicle. The impact ruptured a fuel line and sprayed a fine mist across the steel roadway. Sparks from the engineering vehicle grinding against the damaged railing ignited the vapor, sending a narrow trail of flame back toward the tanker. By then, the center section was no longer level. The two vehicles nearest the unsupported edge began sliding before their drivers could release the brakes. One rolled into the Sivash. The second tore down part of the railing before following it into the water. The sudden loss of weight did not restore balance. It transferred the load again. The central locking joint failed. 2 sections moved apart, dividing the crossing into separate pieces. 21 vehicles had reached Crimea, but were cut off from the force behind them. 16 remained trapped on unstable pontoons. 2 were in the water, and the final 13 were stopped on the northern approach. Ukraine had not destroyed the convoy vehicle by vehicle. The drones had removed the systems holding the roadway beneath it, and the current completed the attack. The crossing was unusable, but most of the pontoons and vehicles could still be recovered if Russia reached them before the remaining structure drifted farther apart. Over the next half hour, Russia began recovering the crossing. The 21 vehicles on the Crimean bank could still move, but they no longer formed a complete logistics package. Most of the fuel, the heavy engineering support, and part of the convoy's command element remained trapped behind them. The forward group was ordered to halt rather than continue toward Dzhankoi alone. Recovery equipment was staged separately to avoid presenting one concentrated target. A reserve tug approached from downstream. A transporter carrying 4 replacement pontoons moved toward the Crimean bank, while a crane began removing the damaged engineering vehicle from the broken joint. A reload vehicle restored 9 of the Tor's 16 missile cells. Radar coverage was redirected lower toward the water, and gun crews repositioned around the recovery equipment. Russian engineers estimated that one temporary lane could be opened within 5 hours. For the first time since the bridge began rotating, Russia was recovering control. But the 7 FP-1s that had separated from the original formation had never returned to base. They had remained outside the defended corridor for more than an hour, preserving enough fuel to keep waiting. Their mission was not to strike the bridge. When the reserve tug took tension on the drifting sections and the pontoon transporter reached the bank, both recovery capabilities were exposed at the same time. That was the trigger the reserve group had been waiting for. The 7 FP-1s turned toward Chonhar. The Tor fired 7 of its 9 reloaded missiles. 4 drones were destroyed, while 3 interceptors failed to produce a kill. Gunfire removed a 5th FP-1, leaving 2 inside the final defensive line. The first struck the reserve tug. The second hit the transporter carrying the replacement pontoons, forcing the crane and nearby crews to withdraw from the spreading fire. A repair operation measured in hours had become a replacement effort measured in days. Across the operation, Ukraine committed 25 FP-1s. Russian missiles, gunfire, and electronic warfare removed 20 of them, an interception rate of 80%. Only 5 drones reached their terminal areas, and 1 missed its assigned target. On paper, the defense had performed successfully, but 4 effective warheads removed 4 essential functions. 1 destroyed an upstream anchor. Another disabled the primary tug. The final 2 eliminated the reserve tug and the transporter carrying the replacement pontoons. The attacking aircraft cost an estimated total of less than $2 million. More than $35 million in vehicles and military cargo had been destroyed, stranded, or removed from the delivery schedule. The movement of approximately 270,000 liters of fuel had been interrupted, with most of the convoy unable to complete the delivery on schedule. A repair initially measured at 5 hours had expanded to at least 48 to 72 hours, depending on how quickly Russia could bring another tug and specialized engineering equipment to Chonhar. Russian air defense had not collapsed. It had destroyed most of the attacking force. But Russia measured the battle in drones destroyed. Ukraine measured it in functions removed. Russia saved most of the convoy and stopped 80% of the FP-1s. Ukraine did not need to destroy every vehicle. It only needed to turn a 460-meter military crossing back into 34 floating sections that no longer functioned as a road. If you value clear military analysis, subscribe and turn on notifications. Then tell us below, which logistics corridor could become the next decisive target? Thank you for watching, and goodbye.